Welcome to this special edition of Go Vote Omaha. This is a candidate forum for Legislative District 8 in the Unicameral, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Jerry Simon, a League member and moderator for the forum. The League of Women Voters never supports or opposes political parties or candidates. We present this forum solely for voter education. Here's the format for our forum. Each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement. Then we'll go to questions prepared by the League of Women Voters. Each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to answer every question. And we'll have the person who answers the question first will have up to 30 seconds of rebuttal time if they desire. We'll finish out our forum with a 1-minute closing statement by our candidates. A timekeeper will alert the candidates when they have 30 seconds of time remaining and when to stop speaking. Before the forum, we drew lots to determine the candidates' initial speaking order, and I'll introduce you to them in that order now. They are Mina Davis and Megan Hunt. Okay, and we'll begin with our opening statements, beginning with Mina Davis.
Good evening, everybody. Apologize for my appearance. As you can see, I've been out knocking on doors, and let me tell you, the work never stops. 90-degree weather, sweating, but you know what? Meeting people like yourself is the most important. I'm 25 years old. They told me that I couldn't do it, and we're making the impossible happen. So for me, someone who is very proud, who is fairly involved in the community, whether it be with the Douglas County Extension Board to being a member of the Young Democrats of America, I'm very, very happy with the progress that we have made on the ground. We are opening up an office, as you can see, 4200 North 30th Street, room 204. This is so that we can engage people. As an organizer by trade, a politician never, one of the things that I wish to see in my community is more people like me, so that when the time comes, when the answer is out there for people who are called to serve, they can join me in this journey. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Megan Hunt.
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this forum together. I'm really grateful to have this platform and opportunity to speak to voters. And also thank you, Ms. Davis, for joining me, and I look forward to the conversation. So my name is Megan Hunt, and it's really hard to talk about the why of running for office in a minute. But one thing that we talk about a lot as candidates is what qualifies us to hold office and to serve the people. And in my case, that's experience. I've lived and I've been a business owner in my district for over a decade, and as an entrepreneur, I've created jobs, I've created mentorship opportunities, and I've brought millions of dollars into Nebraska's economy from out of state with teams that I built from the ground up. As an engaged citizen and activist, I've worked to support issues like medically accurate, age-appropriate education in our schools, paid family leave for working parents like myself who support our economy, and affordable health care. And I'm running because as a political outsider, I've done a lot of work in the past decade as an entrepreneur, a mother, as an activist, and I'm asking for the opportunity from people in my community to support me and help me go to Lincoln to do that work for everyone in our state.
Thank you. Now we'll go to our questions, and the first one is, we'll go to Megan first. In previous sessions of the Unicameral, efforts to impose collection of internet sales tax by online sellers went nowhere. What is your position on such legislation?
I was an outspoken supporter of opportunities in the past to collect internet sales tax, and I'm really encouraged by the recent decision in the Supreme Court that says states have the right to do that. I think that that's something, when we're talking about things like state funding for public education, when we're talking about access to services that people in the middle and working class need to get by, when a lot of these people are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, we need to make sure that we have services for them there. And this is a really important, awesome opportunity in our state to find additional revenue sources, to diversify the ways that we can fund our budget in Nebraska, and bring a lot of those services to people who have seen their services cut in past sessions. Working class people in our state, they are paying more in taxes, they're getting less in services, and when we can look at alternative funding sources for our budget, like internet sales tax, I think those are opportunities that we really can't leave on the table.
Thank you. Mina.
Yeah, and I'd like to speak as an actual member of the working class, as somebody who does currently work 2 jobs. I can tell you firsthand, I am definitely, here's the point. Whether or not you want to collect the internet sales tax, the Supreme Court ruled that it is happening, it's going to happen. $30 to $40 million are estimated to be collected. It's not enough for the shortages we have. So we're still going to be looking to find additional revenue sources. And I'm going to say this up front and clear, as somebody who has utilize the services provided by the state. As somebody who is an ordinary, definitely a political outsider working to change the system, I can say with certainty that looking at this one additional source of revenue is not going to solve the issues if we do not currently address what is essentially an issue at the root. It's a systemic issue. So first and foremost, yes, let's collect it. Second, let's understand that this is not panacea, and we have to also be prepared to look at other sources and fight for those programs that we do not wish to see further cut, because it will happen. 2019 will be a brutal year for sure.
Thank you. Megan, any rebuttal?
No, I think that's well said.
Okay. Our next question. A 2014 University of Nebraska study on climate change concluded that Nebraska needs to have a comprehensive plan of action to prepare for climate change. What should state government be doing about it? And would you support legislation to require and develop a climate action plan for Nebraska? And we'll start with Mina.
Yes, we should require that. And first and foremost, I believe Senator Pansing Brooks has definitely been leading this for some time. As an endorsed member of the Nebraska Farmers Union, as somebody who has been fairly involved with urban agriculture and very concerned about access to food. Clearly, our focus in District 8 is regarding the urban core. What we need to really truly address, especially when we talk about the process in itself and talking about the climate change, that plan, we need to also look at how we look at distribution, people growing food, and making sure people have access to these sources, because at the end of the day, whether we're looking at urban or rural, if we don't have a plan in place, we're leaving people behind, especially as programs such as SNAP are under attack. And if we don't take action in 2019, or at least make inroads, we're going to see even more issues as we look at how do we make sure that everybody has healthy food at their table, which a lot of people right now, with the lack of transportation and stores that provide good produce and what have you, these are things that all stem down, and this is looking at it at a microscopic level.
Thank you. Megan.
I think that we have to look at a climate change commission in Nebraska as a matter of course. This is something that other states are doing. This is something that I don't want Nebraska to be falling behind on, especially when we can see so many economic opportunities that would come from addressing climate change in Nebraska. When we have, vast amounts of land in rural Nebraska and ag land that we can use for wind farming, that we can use for solar panels. I know that's work that a lot of farmers and a lot of communities are already working on in Nebraska. And it's going to be a priority for me in the legislature to be an ally to those people, because the more we can keep up with other states and our economies when we're talking about renewable energy, we're talking about sustainable energy and how that affects farming. Those are other ways that we're going to be able to support our farmers and our rural Nebraskans, and also make sure that Nebraska stays ahead as an innovator and a leader in technology fields, honestly, nationwide. I'm very excited about it.
Thank you. Mina, anything further? Okay. Our next question. Recent research has questioned the benefits of local and state government giving economic development incentives to business, finding that the incentives are too expensive and that they fail to produce promised results, like high-paying jobs or increased economic growth. Should the Unicameral do anything about economic development incentives in Nebraska? We'll start with Megan.
This is a great question, and it's one that deserves a careful look at the research and evidence. I am generally in favor of economic development initiatives. I think that it's the responsibility of a legislative body to make sure that a state is hospitable to business, but also with the caveat that we need to look at policies that make business ownership accessible to people all across the board. It's one thing to talk about tax incentives and tax credits for large multi-state corporations, and it's another thing to look at what we're doing on Main Street, to help people in our immigrant and refugee communities who have a really high rate of entrepreneurship, to help people who are small business owners, many of them single parents like me. That's the way that we support our families. And to make sure that when we're giving economic opportunities to different groups, we're not putting those on the backs of the middle and working class in Nebraska. So it's important for me to say that I would never support legislation for economic development that we couldn't have complete transparency and accountability on in the future. If we're passing laws for economic development, we need to be able to measure the outcomes of those laws, the impact on the communities that they're meant to serve, so that we can go back and fix those laws if they're not really affecting people in the way that will really make Nebraska better for everybody.
Thank you. Mina.
So let's put it out here. The Nebraska Advantage Act is sunsetting in 2020. I think this is something that, when I think about this question, I thought about somebody who does work at a rather large corporation with a red dot, if you know what I mean. I've seen what responsible corporations can do for employees. I've seen what it means to actually provide benefits like paid paternal leave for hourly employees. And if you want to talk about these incentives, you want to talk about people actually putting it out there, we certainly need to be looking at how we move forward in this next couple of years, because when that act finally sunsets in 2020, we will have an issue with people who are asking, why aren't we seeing X, Y, and Z development? For me, we need to also look and make sure that we look at the communities who are underserved, like my community, the Black community, the AAPI community, the immigrant and refugee community, that don't necessarily have access to capital because of the way that structures are put in place, these barriers. And this is something that, when I look at the urban core, when I shop at these places, when I eat their food, these are things that I think about every day, especially as I can keenly remember corporations like ConAgra leaving co-workers of mine out of a job. And I think when we see people leaving the Midwest due to benefits that these places receive, we have to be very careful.
Thank you. Megan, anything further?
No.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, we'll start with Mina on this one. Last session in the Unicameral, a bill to allow tax credits for donations to scholarship funds to send children to private schools failed to pass. Do you support such legislation?
No. I can tell you why. They always say the Black and brown kids need the help, and I say, if you want to give us the help, then maybe you should start with actually giving us the funding for our schools at the state level. Fully fund TOS at the state level. We need to evaluate that formula. Stop dodging around it. My former principal, I can never call him senator. He is Dr. Kolowski, Dr. K to me. He tried to put forth a bill to look at it. They shot it down, could not get out of committee. And let me tell you, if we want to look at those measures that say that they're for people that look like me with my skin color, I say there are studies out there that show that there are no benefits to this. And frankly, stop using my community for your political gain, because I'm tired of it. And what we need to do is make sure that the schools I'm seeing, whether it be around Hamilton Street, these kids who know that they don't necessarily have the resources that they need versus some of the other schools, it is an equity issue. And I think when we start having people who have no clue what it's like to even teach these kids, I'm a debate coach, 10 years, I've been throughout the Omaha metro area. I think it's extremely disrespectful and definitely ignorant of the issue at hand, and definitely ignoring the systemic issues as well.
Thank you. Megan.
I think that's really well said. I would echo the things that Mina said. And to speak from my own experience, I'm completely against the use of public funds for private education, full stop, period. That includes vouchers, tax credits, and public funding for charter schools, because I believe that tax dollars should only be made available to schools that serve every child, and that our public schools in Nebraska have a long way to go to make sure that we have an equitable experience for all children in public education. So while I support every parent's right to choose a private education for their child, as a state legislator, I promise to fight for a public education that serves every child, regardless of the zip code they're from, regardless of their background, and regardless of their parents' ability to pay for an education. I don't think that that's something that we can hold over our kids. That's not fair. I'll also say that I've knocked over 15,000 doors, and I haven't heard any strong support for charter schools in my district. So for me, that would not be a legislative priority. I was a vocal opponent of the bill that Jerry mentioned in the past session, LB 295, I think, that was that one that would have brought tax credits for donations to private schools. And my opinion about public schools is, if a school's not good enough for my child, it's not good enough for any child. And we need to elect people who will commit to working for a great education for every child in Nebraska and our public school system.
Thank you. Mina, anything further? Okay. Our next question, and we'll start with Megan on this one. Does Nebraska adequately fund public education at the state level, and how would you approach it?
No, it's not adequately funded. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who would disagree with that position. We touched a little bit earlier on potential alternate sources of funding in our state for public education. I think that when we have a lot of people on one side talking about wanting property tax relief, and then we have a lot of other people saying, well, then how are we going to fund our schools that is based on property tax? That's the signal. That's why we really need to look at that TIOSA formula and have an honest, sober, thoughtful conversation about what we're going to do as lawmakers, to make sure that that public education is equitably funded, that we're not cutting into the budget for services, but that we're giving people all over Nebraska a fair shake on their tax bill. For me, I think that everything needs to be on the table. I'm completely open-minded when we're talking about ways that we're going to find alternative extra funding in Nebraska. I'm willing to look at sales tax. I'm willing to look at taxing services. I'm willing to look at the internet sales tax that we talked about earlier. And I'm happy to have been in conversation with a lot of organizations in Nebraska who are working specifically on this issue. I'm a parent, but my background is in entrepreneurship, and so I'm good at working with budgets, but my background is not in school funding. And so it's important to me that voters know that I will definitely have people at the table, and I'm eager to share with voters what it is I learn, and that it's going to be the experts in education that I look to find the solution for this. I don't have all the answers to this stuff.
Thank you. Mina.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a data scientist. My background is in economic forecasting, predictive analytics. We look at these algorithms and these formulas specifically when we talk about affecting social policy and changes. When we talk about funding school formula, that has been an issue since the 1980s. The TOSA was essentially a compromise, and it's now, like I've mentioned before, my former principal said that there's an issue. They wouldn't even look at it. We have to be very careful when we look at sales and other use tax increases for the fact that it can essentially be fairly regressive and harmful to communities like the ag community. I hear this every day from people out in western Nebraska and central Nebraska, and I tell them, I understand. We definitely have to look at everything out in the open. However, I also know as somebody who is of the working class, anytime someone says, let's increase XYZ tax, I ask them, have you ever been in a position to buy this particular product? A lot of the time when I've seen states make these moves to look at and evaluate these sales taxes, oftentimes there are things that poor people like me like to actually buy. I think that's very problematic, and I think a lot of people who I've spoken with both sides, the Platt Institute and Open Sky. We have to really be mindful of who we're talking about, what's being affected, and when we think about putting together a new algorithm formula, we need to leave the political bias out of it and actually get to work and get it done.
Megan, any rebuttal?
I think, like I said, I think that's really well said, and I just want to clarify my point and add that I would never support tax cuts that are put on the backs of the middle and working class. I agree with Mina that a lot of times when we're talking about like cigarette taxes and soda taxes, like those are things that affect the working class disproportionately. They affect people in poverty, and when we really should be looking at tax cuts for the wealthy and making sure that they're not getting economic benefits on the backs of the people who are really the ones that need these services in the first place. I think that was well said.
Thank you. Our next question. No legislation for property tax reform was passed in the Unicameral this session. What should be done about Nebraska property taxes? And we'll start with Mina.
Oh, this is my favorite question. Like I told you, I love economic forecasting. This is something that I've been in conversation with former Senator Burkhart, other people like I mentioned, because let me tell you, when you look at this line of thought, whether you be conservative leaning, Platt Institute, or more liberal leaning with the Open Sky, it's a conversation that we need to have. Obviously, we're looking at additional revenue sources like the online sales tax, but like I mentioned, that's only $30 to $40 million. And let me tell you, the distribution of that doesn't necessarily guarantee any stopgap by any means. Also, we have an issue that people have been bringing up, the legalization of sports gambling. Now, people might have an issue about it, but let me tell you, there's things that we have to look at, services that we need to reevaluate, and it all comes back to having people in urban Omaha certainly understand that it's not just an issue of property tax reform, but it's also an issue when we see people like myself who are renters. We need to also be included in that conversation. I supported heartily Senator Hansen's bill, and I will do it again in a heartbeat to make sure renters like me up to 2% of their yearly up to $500 state income tax refund. We need to have those things in there as well. So about, in terms of looking at algorithms, formulas, what have you, yeah, let's evaluate the additional revenue sources, but let's also be mindful of the groups of people, especially those who are living around where I live, 48th and Cumming, and also renters, because we are a largely affected group of people who are seemingly forgotten about every single time this conversation comes to front.
Thank you. Megan.
Property taxes are a tough issue, and if they weren't a tough issue, I think they would be solved already, because I know that there's people on both sides of the aisle who have already been doing really hard work to find a solution to that, and that's something that a lot of people in Nebraska are prioritizing as really important. The truth is, over the past several decades, we've really created a structural deficit in our budget, and we've eroded our revenue with special interest exemptions and loopholes and tax credits, and as a result, that's really cut into resources that we have to provide property tax relief as a state. When we can't fund healthcare, when we can't fund education, I have bad news, we don't have funding to cut property taxes. So we do need to look at new revenue sources for Nebraska if we want to make a dent in that and provide relief for people. One area that I'm really excited about, in addition to internet sales tax, which is a big theme here today, is something I've been speaking to Senator Anna Wishart about, which is the legalization of industrialized hemp. In ag land, that's something that farmers want. That's something that people in rural Nebraska could really benefit from. It's something that's already happening in other places in our country. And again, I think that looking at ways that we can bring cannabis into our state, looking at ways we can industrialize hemp, those are going to be additional revenue sources that might be a little spicy for some people. It might be a little contentious conversation in the legislature, but other states, other red states are already doing this, and I don't see why this can't be a meaningful, impactful way for us to find some more money for this property tax relief that we need.
Thank you. Mina, anything further?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things. So first and foremost, if we're going to talk about cannabis legalization, let's make sure that we also look at the people whose populations are vastly affected by its possession. So if we're going to talk about legalizing anything, make sure let's look at the criminal justice reform aspect of it. Second, let's also remember that there are people right now who are being priced out of their homes who have owned them, particularly areas like Dundee and Benson, and that is highly problematic. So, you know, when we look at these solutions, whether they be revenue neutral or not, we need to be careful and mindful.
Thank you. Here's our next question, and we'll start with Megan on this. It's been said the Unicameral has become more partisan in the last 2 sessions. Do you agree? And how do you work in a bipartisan way? And how will you ensure that the Unicameral remains a nonpartisan legislature? Megan.
So I'm not afraid to say that the majority of the strength and the power among our 3 co-equal branches of government has been unfairly held by the governor's office for the last 3 years. And I think voters know that, so I think I can say that. And I think the legislature would be really improved if we elected people who understand that the priority of state senators is first to serve their constituents. It's next to make sure that we're looking at policy that's sustainable for the success of everybody in Nebraska. And to do that, we have to cooperate and we have to be respectful of the diversity of political beliefs in the legislature. And that's what I fear has really fallen by the wayside in the past several years. You know, I think it's so cool that we don't even talk about bipartisanship in Nebraska because we have people from more than 2 political parties represented in our unicameral, and we should be really proud of that in Nebraska. But in any case, we need leaders in all branches of government who lead with their values, not with their parties. We need to return to values-based leadership, not making it personal. People are partisan. You know, I have my favorite issues. Anybody can Google me and see things that I've spouted off about. You know how I feel about things, but at the same time, I'm proud that I'm known for the teams that I've built, for the relationships that I have, and the network that I have in Nebraska, so that, you know, when I have a question about something that isn't in my wheelhouse, because as a Democrat, that's not something that I have really prioritized in policy, but I need to know about it, I'm going to know who to call on and talk to. So I will say that we need representatives who are willing to collaborate, and we also need representatives who can't be bullied. And in District 8, I'm that person.
Mina.
I don't know what y'all are talking about, but I'm definitely not a person to be bullied. First and foremost, I'm an organizer. You work with people all across the spectrum. And I can tell you, you do not if you want people to work with you, the first thing is you do not insult them and their livelihood. I think a lot of people that I've spoken to in the legislature, you know, I've spoken to people on diversity of issues, and it comes down to really being knowledgeable, respectful, and having an open ear. I think when you want somebody who isn't pushed around, you better look at me. I was not pushed out of the primary, and I can tell you for certain, I'm walking every day and making sure that we get to work in terms of collaborating and making sure all opinions are heard. The people who I've spoken to and the people who I engage with every day know that this is what I'm about. I think at the end of it, if we want to return to a partisan or nonpartisan legislature, we got to first start with respect, really engage, and get to know people, like get to know their families, get to know their extracurricular activities, because when you get to know people at that base, things change. Now, like I said, they all know my party. They all know who I worked for. They all know who I went to the National Convention for in 2016. But that hasn't stopped people from looking at me as somebody who is knowledgeable about the issues and is willing to get to work.
Any rebuttal, Megan?
No.
Okay, we're ready for our closing statements then, and we'll start with Mina Davis.
Thanks for joining me, everybody. Like I said, I apologized earlier for my parents, but you know, the work never stops. And it has been quite the journey, especially engaging with people. And I'm here to say that sometimes we have to lead by example. Being 25 years old, I'll be turning 26 in September, and also having been involved and somebody who's been told repeatedly, no, you can't, I say you can. And I want to be an example for people who feel that disengaged, that they can't be involved with this person or that person. And I say, you know, I'm very proud of the work we've done, whether it's opening up an office, engaging communities that have been left behind for several political cycles or more. It's my pleasure to be able to speak to you on these issues. And you know how to reach me. It's www.minadavis2018.com, and I'm looking forward to the questions and further engagement.
Thank you. And a closing statement from Megan Hunt.
So there are 1,000 ways to affect change in our communities. You can write letters to your representatives, you can get really involved in your faith and your community organizations, you can promote locally owned businesses, and I even think just being a good neighbor and being there for the people in your community, the people who live around you, just introducing yourself and being there to help out when they need it. I've done all these things, and I believe that the people who do these things are the everyday heroes in our communities, and they're the backbone of what we have here. And so I knew that I didn't have to run for office to make a meaningful impact, but I know that loving where I live and feeling so passionately about my community, it would be irresponsible for me to not make a run for it. So I'm Megan Hunt, and I'm running for the state legislature so I can hold our lawmakers accountable, so I can remind them who they work for, and so that voters know that they will have an ally in the Capitol who they too can hold accountable. Please look me up online. My website is meganfornebraska.com, and you can ask me questions, write me up. I can't wait to hear from you, and I hope that I can count on your vote November 6th.
Thank you. The League would like to thank both our candidates for being in the forum this evening. Thank you. That concludes our forum for Legislative District 8 in the Unicameral. For the League of Women Voters, I'm Jerry Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues and the candidates. And on Tuesday, November 6th, Election Day, go vote, Omaha.